Cookies is the 15th episode of season 6 of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Halvorson, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. There's not a great variety in what's happening, so there's not a tremendous amount to talk about, but it's still a really enjoyable episode. I think the opening scene and the final two scenes are just amazing. To be honest, there are only, I think, 2 other scenes, but nevertheless, it's a really enjoyable episode. It starts off with a Frontier Girls meeting, and Ray goes down there. They're talking about selling cookies. They're preparing to sell cookies, and it's a fun scene. Ray arrives late. He's standing on children. It's really entertaining, and we find out, or I guess we determine, that Peggy, the group leader, played by Amy Aquino, is quite a headstrong individual who clearly wants to win this because there are prizes for whichever girl sells the most cookies, and it's meant to be the children selling the cookies, but I think it's very clear that, at least with some parents, they're going to be controlling things. And we'll come back to Peggy in a little bit. Ray is really annoyed by her. He refers to her as Hitler on multiple occasions, which I think is maybe a bit extreme, but clearly he has a problem. And then that problem is amplified when he goes over to Marie and Frank's and Robert's there as well. And they bought cookies from her. I don't think they realised that it was the cookies Ali would be selling. She just turned up at the door and they bought cookies. And this just enrages Ray. And then Debra comes over and they kind of determine that maybe Ray doesn't like Peggy because she's a woman. I'll be honest, I never got that impression. I don't think that had Peggy been a man with the same attitudes, I think Ray would have felt the same. I don't think that the issue is the fact that she's a woman, but this is clearly what they're leaning into. And then things become fantastic. We only have 2 scenes left in the full episode. There's not a lot of variety, but as I said, it's still a great episode. Ray is setting up a table with Ali, setting up the cookies, and he's not controlling things completely. I was a bit concerned that he would immediately take over and tell Ali everything that she had to do. There's maybe a bit of that, but I feel like it does come across more as guiding her rather than controlling her. And then along comes Peggy and her daughter Molly. And Molly is played by Alexandra Romano, who is actually Ray Romano's daughter. And this is meant to be Peggy's spot. And she demands that Ray gives her the spot. Apparently it's a good spot where they're going to sell a load of cookies. And the girls, Molly and Ali, go inside for ice cream so that we can have a bit of a standoff between Ray and Peggy. And it was a little slow. But once Peggy started to try and move the table, it was just fabulous. The physical comedy is great. It is the flimsiest table that I have ever seen. I'm surprised it was standing at all. And Ray is... well, Peggy is clearly a lot stronger than him in this position, and Ray is definitely not winning. And then Debra comes along, and she sees that Peggy is beating up her husband. As she said to her, "Nobody beats up my husband," which is not what Ray wanted her to say, but it's lovely that she has Ray's back. And the table is kind of just on the floor at this point, but it's in her way, so Debra just flicks it. Maybe that's an exaggeration. She grabs hold of it and flings it, but it was so smooth that it felt like the table was weightless as she just shoved it aside effortlessly, and it kind of fell over Ray. And I'm feeling like it has to be a lightweight table because that looked like it was going to hurt. The table legs were going everywhere. Ray could have easily had a table leg in the eye. It's a very flimsy table, but it was just so beautifully executed from Debra. And she stood up to Peggy and made Peggy know that she is a bully and this is not acceptable. And as I said, nobody beats up my husband. And it was a really powerful way to end the scene, and I thought it was very beautifully done. And then the final scene is Ray briefly enjoying the beach chair, which was the top prize. They sold the most cookies. And then he sits on the chair and it collapses underneath him, which is a bit unfortunate because maybe he's just broken Ali's beach chair, which I hope is not the case. I hope it's fixable. But either way, it was a delightful way to end it, and I thought it was a great episode. As I said, not a lot of variety in what's happening, but it's still really entertaining. Highlights would be the opening scene and then the final 2 scenes. And as I said, there are only 1 or 2 scenes in the middle in between those. But it's a fun episode. some great messages there about how to treat people and, well, how to not treat people as well, because Peggy clearly was a bully, and it wouldn't surprise me if this is a very believable, realistic scenario that a lot of people find themselves in if they're trying to sell Girl Scout cookies. I'd like to think that's not the case, but let's be real, it probably is. If you have any experience of that, I'd be very interested to hear. Cookies is a delightful episode, really good fun, a tiny bit slow in places, but nevertheless, still an absolute joy. It's a really solid episode of Everybody Loves Raymond.